Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation for this seminar. I'm sorry, I'm going to give a presentation in English. I hope it will work well for all of you. Doesn't work in. Yeah, what I was starting to tell is around the year 2000. Is it sharp?
Yes.
Yeah. Could be sharper, maybe.
We collect a lot of data on breeding waders in Europe, and I compile all these data, and we made such density maps. And these are this is a density map of breeding pairs of what we call farmland waders in Europe. And the darker the color, the higher density it is. So if you can see the color, these dark colors, and I'm going to present this overview of trends in Northwest Europe by focusing on 4 countries with the high densities: Estonia, Denmark, the Netherlands, and then, well, northern Germany. Germany is a big country, and a lot of Germany has no breeding waders, more or less, but they also have very high concentration in northern Germany. And then I will not focus so much on Sweden, because I can see on the program that we will go back to that. I will look at 8 species which I call meadowbirds, or this is the wet grassland breeding waders. I'm talking about oystercatcher, lapwing, Baltic Dunlin, ruff, black-tailed godwit, curlew, and redshank. These species I'm going to tell about. But is oystercatcher actually a meadowbird? Well, it's a meadow here. Together with Richard Ottwald, we gave a common presentation at a wader or a wet grassland seminar in Estonia in 2014. And there Richard estimated that in Sweden it was only 3,000 out of 11,000 pairs of breeding oystercatchers that were actually found in grassland. In Denmark it's a much higher proportion, and I include salt marshes into wet grassland. So in Denmark it's really a meadowbird in this way. The only monitoring program we have in Europe where you focus entirely on trends on the coastal grassland, it's an Estonian program that have been into work since 1999. Here you see the trend curve of oystercatcher populations on the coastal grassland in Estonia, and as you can see, oystercatchers are having a really bad time. In the Netherlands we have a trend curve, but it includes all oystercatchers. Actually in the Netherlands a lot of the oystercatchers are found on wet grasslands, but they also breed in agricultural fields and in dunes and on beaches and so on. But so it's all habitats together. In Denmark we have a point count program, pretty much like the Swedish one, and as you can see, we have indices back to 85, and in the beginning the oystercatchers did pretty stable, but then they started to decline from beginning of 2000, and now we're down at an index of more than 35. So it's 2/3 of the oystercatchers in Denmark in total in all habitats has disappeared in this period. We have been looking at the breeding success of oystercatchers, and we have found out both in the international Wader Study and at Tipperne, where I'm working, that there's a very low nest survival of the oystercatcher, very low nest survival, and very low chick survival also. So it's probably a nest and egg and chick survival that's the main thing of the oystercatchers. Then the lapwing. In 2014, Richard estimated that 8,000 out of 63,000 pairs of lapwings in Sweden were actually breeding wet grassland. So when you look at lapwings population in Sweden in total, you basically look at lapwing populations trends on agricultural fields. In Denmark, in 2015, almost half of our lapwings were breeding on wet grassland, including the salt marshes, but the lapwings are not so much in salt marshes, and then the other half on these cultivated fields. Again, the Estonian has this very nice monitoring program, and on their meadows, coastal meadows, you can see from 99 until 2022, the lapwing populations have more than doubled, and that's a different story. If you look at all these trends curves that looks at the total population in this is the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Germany, and in Denmark, you can see there's a declining curve, not as bad as the oyster catcher, but it is declining when you're looking at these general trend curves. But as we just saw, like in Sweden, a very small proportion actually of the Swedish lapwings are breeding on the wet grasslands. But what I did in Denmark then, so you see again the red curve, this is the point count curve. We went back, this is the index back from 100 down to 40, a bit less than 40. But then we also have a monitoring program where we count breeding numbers on a lot of sites. And this blue line you can see, it's the number of breeding pairs of lapwings in 89 Danish wet grassland sites. And all of a sudden you have a completely different trend curve from the red one. On the wet grassland sites, and of course it's the better 89 sites, basically because this is where we have our focus. But at least on a lot of wet grassland sites in Denmark, where you just have a simple management in many of them, we have in the period from 1990 until 2023, we have gone up from around 1,500 pairs until 2,400 pairs. And if you look at the blue trend line and then this Estonian coastal trend line, they're pretty much similar. There's a red shank. The red shank, again, in Sweden, in 2014, Richard estimated that it's a pretty small proportion of the breeding red shanks in Sweden that are actually breeding on wet grasslands. You have a lot of red shanks, of course, in the north. That's probably the reason why. But if you look at the Danish situation, almost all of our red shanks nowadays, they're actually breeding on wet grassland when we include also the salt marshes. So in Denmark it's a meadowbird, in Sweden it's a bit more mixed. If you look at this Estonian program again, you can see that the red shanks there basically have had a stable population in these 24 years. If you look at all the other curves, they're not declining very much, but again you have a slight decline in Germany, in the Netherlands, and in the point count index in Denmark. In Sweden, there's the point count index has a huge decline here, but again, then the rest of the time you have pretty much the same, a slight decrease in red shanks. But then again, if you look at this point count again, is everywhere in Denmark, and the point counts, they are very much not in the very big areas. The points are pretty much out in the landscape. So instead, if you look at in our monitoring program of breeding bird counts, we have regular counts in 278 Danish breeding sites of red shanks. And the blue line, it's the number of breeding pairs in these 278 sites that are all grassland or salt marsh sites. And then all of a sudden you can see that the blue line again, even though Denmark and Estonia are placed pretty much away from each other, you see again that the blue line is pretty much a similar trend as you see on the coast of Estonia.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Where were the point counts carried out as opposed to the grassland count?
We don't have, in Denmark we don't have these standard routers as you have in Sweden. So it's basically volunteers choosing where they want to do these point counts. So they are basically, well, they're spread all over the landscape, but you are, when you are having your point count route 10 or 20 points or 12 or whatever, then you basically do not walk into a meadow and count in the middle of a big meadow. So it's a tendency that you are, in the point counts, you are counting on smaller sites and more marginal sites compared to when you count the number of breeding birds on the breeding site.
Okay.
So it's probably the reason why you have this difference. And then the species we're going to talk a lot about, I can see on the program, the black-tailed godwit. Again, Estonians have this nice monitoring program, and as you can see, like the oyster catcher, also the black-tailed godwit, they have had a very bad time from 1990 until 2022. They've gone down about 60% and disappeared on these coastal meadows. And if you look at the trend curves from Netherlands and Germany, you can also see in the beginning, in the 80s, early 90s, quite stable, and then a continuous decline until recently. And it's pretty much the same in Germany, that they started declining the early 90s, and then it just went down and down. Black-tailed godwit in Denmark, we have basically a knowledge on all the breeding pairs of black-tailed godwits since 73. So we know the real numbers, not only the index of the trend. And as you can see, in the beginning of the period, they were still kind of establishing themselves, becoming very numerous in the good sites, then a stable period, and then from the beginning of 90s starting to have a decline, and then a continuous decline. So black-tailed godwits, as we all know, they are not having a very good time. In 2014 we did the same, Richard and I, we did this, we compared the numbers of black-tailed godwits breeding in Denmark and then in Sweden, and we have, you had numbers from Sweden since 76, and at that time we were about same magnitude of breeding black-tailed godwits in Sweden and Denmark, but when we just got more and more and had a very a good population in this period relatively, then in Sweden the population had just declined all the time from 76 until 2014 when we made this analysis. The curlew, Richard estimated that 7 out of 9,000 pairs in Sweden, they are breeding were breeding in 2014 in wet grassland. In Denmark, it's not so much a wet grassland species. It's much more typical breeding in a habitat like shown on this picture, dry grassland in June and June slacks and so on. So it's not really a meadowbird in Denmark. Again, you have this Estonian program, but as you can see on these paler red columns in the background, the data are probably not very good, so I get it's a standard error. But basically a stable population, but the standard error becoming bigger and bigger. In Sweden, we have from the point count index a decline. The first years is an increase and then a decline. In Germany, you also have had a decline. It's not a huge decline, but it has been declining all over the period from 1990. In Denmark, we don't really have good figures for this. And then the ruff, one of the really nice successful ruffs in Denmark, just fledged a chick of ruff on the island of Man. The ruffs in the Netherlands, they have an index. The breeding ruffs have basically disappeared in the Netherlands in the period from the 90s until now. In both Denmark and Germany, it's also a complete mess. We have lost so many breeding ruffs. So, and for us, for these three countries, it's much more of focal species on the meadows. I understand if you're not focusing that much on meadow breeding ruffs because you still have pretty many in the mountains. And if you can see the magnitude, in the Netherlands they only have 10 to 30 breeding females left. In Estonia 30 to 50, and they cannot make an index in their monitoring program because there are too few. And in Sweden we got estimated that there were around 50 breeding on wet grassland in 2014, and you had a national total of 25,000. And then another one we're going to talk about the Baltic Dunlin. Here we have, if you look at this, this is the index, and they have lost around 40% of the Baltic Dunlins in Estonia on the coastal meadows. In Denmark we know the actual number of pairs, and we had a quite stable period until, quite stable period until the early 90s, and then we had a decline, continuous decline all over the time. In Germany, they had this huge decline, and then kind of stability on a very, 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 very low level recently. Yes, so quite depressing, isn't it? But is there any reason to have hope? One place where they've been doing a lot to these wet grassland breeders is an area here in Germany, Dümmer, in Niedersachsen, halfway between Bremen and Wader Study. Here, Henrik Belting moved into the area and started working around 1990. And from 1990 until now, they have purchased, the state has purchased 2,500 hectares, and then they have optimized everything according to the demands of grass and breeding. So here you get an impression of a huge wet landscape from early March, of course. It's not the breeding season, but you get a quite impressive impression. And during his 30 years with this fantastic area, Henrik Belting had made a list of important meadowbird demands of their breeding site if you want to have successful grassland bird conservation. And he points at you need large areas of wet grassland, you need high openness and almost no vertical structures, you need pretty low disturbance, you need high water tables and temporarily flooded areas, you need only a low or intermediate nutrient content in the soil, you need that mowing and grazing are actually adjusted to the timing and distribution of the nesting of the species, you need that there should be a sufficient farming intensity to keep the optimal vegetation height and structure. You need a high heterogeneity both on the landscape level and on the field level, so the different meadowbirds have something to choose among. You can only have a moderate predation, and you need to have a well-organized guardianship of the area and a good system of monitoring. And I mean, I was asked to talk about goods, threats to the meadowbirds. So you pretty much turn things around, and you say if any of these 10 points are missing, there's a high potential that you will actually have this as a threat to the meadowbirds in the area. And he stresses all the time that you simply all conditions need to be met if you want successful grassland bird conservation. And then it's an example of how it worked in the Dümmer area. Actually, when he started in the 1990s, the red shank didn't breed at all. It had just disappeared as a breeding bird in the area. Then the first years they made a nature reserve. They started to buy land, and not that much happened. They started to re-wet the area in 2000. Not that much happened. Then they had re-wetted the entire area in 2007. Not that much helped. And then in 2010 they started a huge predation management program. And then all of a sudden they had 120 pairs of breeding red shank.
Ole, could you take back the previous picture because I think
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And if you look at our problem species, the black-tailed godwit, here they started buying area. The negative trend just disappeared, continued. They re-wetted the area. They kind of stabilized the situation, and then started to increase. They had re-wetted the entire area, and then they started predation management. And then, so actually, if you see here in the bottom point here around 2000, they were down at 50 pairs of black-tailed godwit in the area. Now they have more than 200 pairs. So even for black-tailed godwit, they were successful. Lapwing, pretty much the same, but then a bottom period around 2000, and then when they started predation management, a huge increase. So as you can see, they have now more than 800 pairs. When it was down 20 years ago, there were over 100. So I mean, it really works for them. And for the curlew, they reacted immediately on making a nature reserve, starting to re-wet the area. So they have been increasing all over. And just to remind you of the German curlew index, I mean, this is not typical for Germany, so it's really it's really something happening only in the German area. And then when they did this meadowbird conservation project, they actually had several breeding species of meadow breeding birds coming back, and a very important one for us who have no mountains to go to look for ruffs in, that they got the breeding ruffs back, and this year they have started a large ruff project with light loggers and everything. I'm going to participate the next years, and this year they expected to have around 20 breeding females of ruff in the Estonia area, and they were completely disappeared 25 years ago. And then just the final case study, my working field, Tipperne, where I've been working with breeding birds since 1985. I did my first breeding counts there, so I followed this area pretty intensively for a lot of years. We don't have the possibility to fulfill or to meet all these demands. The green ones are the one we can cope with. We can have large areas, or we have large areas of wet grassland. We have high openness, few vertical structures. We have low disturbance. We have sufficient farming. We have the high heterogeneity on landscape and field level. We have a moderate predation after we started an efficient predator management after 2018, and we also have well-organized guardianship and monitoring. But we don't have the possibility to do everything. Some years we have high water tables with temporary flooded areas, but we have no possibility to keep or to get water into the area. We are completely dependent on precipitation. So when we have really dry years, we have dry years, and that's it. So this we cannot get every year. And then we have the problems that we cannot have low or intermediate nutrient content of soil, because we have a lot of nutrients in the rainwater. And we also have floodings with a lot of nutrients in the lower part. So I mean, this we cannot cope with, because we have no control of the contamination by nutrients. And also mowing and grazing is a problem. We can mow exactly how we want, and we only mow after every breeding bird have stopped breeding. But because of the nature agency's green image, I guess, they think we need to have organic cattle. And organic cattle in Denmark, they have a lot of welfare, cattle welfare things. And that one thing is that they have to get out very early. So if we want to have cattle grazing, and that's very important for us, then we simply need to take them in 2 to 3 weeks too early. And so, I mean, one thing is, and I'm sure you're sitting around when you are organizing management in your different areas, and you say, well, these 10 points, we can never do that. But I mean, we need to have it as a kind of list, so we better understand why it doesn't work for us. And that's probably what we can see. We can see, as you can see, lapwings and redshanks, they're doing pretty well. And after 2018, when we started the predation management, we have had a nice increase in lapwings. We have had a nice increase in and this is to show what it means with this efficient predator management. This is the daily nest predation rate. So you can see we had a very fluctuating. Some years we had huge predation rate, high predation rate. Some years low, but it fluctuated a lot. But then we started predation management, and then also all of a sudden, every year now, we have really low predation rates. So it makes a huge difference of the nest survival whether you have this predation management or not. And it really makes a difference because these years where you have these predation rates in this area, you have a hatching rate of something like 15-20% or so, according to predation. Then you have the trampling of cattle, everything on top. But here you're at having hatching rates around 50 to 70%, which is really good, and you get a lot of chicks like that. And if you look at the black-tailed godwits, we have had the same decline as you see everywhere. It may mean that these 6 years where we have the predation control, we may have stabilized the situation, but it's still so short period, so you never know what happens. But we have some kind of optimism at Tipperne right now. And then the ruff, we have around half of the Danish breeding ruffs, they are actually breeding in my site. And then we measure the surface water table or the groundwater table. So we measure the number of centimeters from the surface down to the water level, and then we define very dry according to the time where we get below a certain level of 60 centimeters or something. So we have had in this period in this period from 2000 until 2023, we've had 6 very dry seasons, and as you can see, these are really the low one. Here you have one very dry year, and all of a sudden you have very few, again very few, and then we have had 3 out of the last 5 years we have had very dry seasons. But this year we had a very nice season. We had 19 breeding females, 13 of them having chicks, so we have a little optimism, although we don't expect that we will go back to 50 or more breeding ruffs. And then very interesting thing is that to see that the ruffs, they're actually reacting on this surface water. I mean, in the first graph, you have all the years 98 to 2023. This is the dryness this way, and the number of breeding females this way, and you can see the drier, the fewer, but it's not a very good correlation. But if you look at, and in the same period, our fly rate has gone down by 80%, 70-80% because of destruction of wetlands in the Netherlands. But if you look at the last 8 years, where the total population have been basically stable, there we see a very, very strong correlation between the water table, the 28th of April, and then the number of breeding females later on. So it seems that although the females just arrived at Tipperne at that period, then they simply decide more or less at once whether they're going to stay or whether they want to go further north. And then the Dunlins. Well, decline, and then a stable period. We thought now we know how to deal with Dunlins, and then a decline again every year. We have two specific threats for breeding dunlins in my area, and I've seen the same. It's happening in eastern Germany. We have a huge problem with eutrophication, and when we have these very wet winters, and when they dry out and become very dry spring, we get such algae maps, and especially in 2020 and 23, that kind of covers all the vegetation. So it means that very poor conditions for having nest sites and for feeding chicks. And then we also have a problem that all our temporary ponds, they are becoming covered with very dense vegetation of Heliocaris uniglomis, I don't know if it's correct, Angsev in Swedish, and that took place in 2016, and these temporary ponds are actually the feeding sites of Dunlin chicks. So I guess eutrophication, the recent years, eutrophication in Tipperne is a very important thing for the Dunlins. Then we also find every year a lot of a high proportion of nests that are actually trampled because we cannot postpone the turnout date of the cattle. And this just to show what this algae mats mean. This GPS is exactly on the spot where there was a Dunlin nest the year before, where there was nice grass. Here you can see this algae mat. It prevents, this is from mid-May, it prevents the grass to grow, and it also probably limits the invertebrates in that area. So
What kind of grass do you have there?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Not exactly.
What do you think?
It's a spot where I don't really know the vegetation, so I cannot say. Others, some botanists that can help. No. Well, I'm more looking at the functionality of the vegetation for my.
Kan det vara krypven på
Tipperne, yeah. I think it's
Skulle ni för?
it could be yeah. And just to sum up, and then I'm finished. So what I've just showed, I mean, if we want to look in particular at the latest period, so if you look at the oyster catchers both on the wet grassland and all habitats, they are, have had a huge decline. Lapwings, they are basically stable on the wet grasslands, but in all habitats, including the cultivated fields, they are having a huge decline. Redshank, basically stable in the wet grassland salt marshes part, and if you look at all habitats, they are declining slightly. Black-tailed godwits, huge declines. Curlew, slight decline. Ruff, some decline, but it's basically because you have lost most of them in this period. And then the Baltic Dunlin, a huge decline. And thank you for listening.
Could you please go back to the presentation?
Jag vill inte om det tidigare. I är välkomna att fråga på svenska. Om ni vill.
Bara tacka med den här fina boken först och främst. Odlarnas Jätterön av Reino Andersson och Lars-Åke Flodin som sitter i publiken, och sen Gunnar Pettersson som numera är avliden och duktig fotograf och målare.
Ja, många tack för det.
Mycket fint.
Jag har en fråga, Ola.
Ja, Hans.
När du pratar om predatorinnsatser, vad är det mer exakt ni gör och hur bedriver ni predator?
På Tipperne.
Ja.
Dömer känner jag inte detaljer.
Nej, jag
känner
tänker
du säkert själv bättre. Men på Tipperne, där har vi har kamera på alla foxdens, rävgravar, grytor. Och där har vi en mycket entusiastisk jägare där också är fågelintresserad. Så när så där går en räv i sådan en gryta, så bliver der skicket en sms til ham med et billede om kvælden, og så sitter han der næste morgen og skyder ræven, når den kommer op. Så vi skyder ræv, og vi skyder mordhund. Og det er de 2 andre, vi og på det Tipperne er bare 650 hektar, og der bliver skyttet mellem 7 og 10 voksne ræv hver år. Og så nogle år er også, får de også unger, og så bliver de også
svenska eller engelska?
Det bestämmer.
Det bestämmer jag, okej. Jätteintressant och glädjande att det finns lite hopp någonstans. Det behöver vi. Jag var nyfiken på viporna, tossviporna.
Ja.
Som
Ska jag finna till
Nej, du kan titta på det. Som ökar eller kanske stabiliseras på strandängarna och minskar överallt annars. Tror du att det är så att viporna som häckar på jordbruksmark har flyttat in på strandängarna? Är det som förklarar ökningen eller stabiliseringen?
Det kunne være tilfældet, hvis det var en kort periode. Men det er en periode på 30-40 år. Jeg tror ikke det er sannolikt, men vi snakkede også om det i går, der jeg har just set en undersøgning fra Estland, som viser, at prædationstrykket på tofsviber i konventionelt dyrkede afgrøder, jordbruksmark, som bliver sået om våren, at der er prædationstrykket mycket lavt. Og hvis vi tænker på, at ude i den store verden, der fluktuerer rævbestander af liten som det her. Så jeg tror hvis man går tilbage, så har det været sådan, at når rævbestanden var lav, for eksempel efter skarp eller noget, så har tofsviberne fået mycket unger alle steder, inklusive på engerne. Men når ræverne er i top, så bliver der ikke meget succes på engerne, men så er der nogle tofsvibe unger på jordbrugsmark, som har succes, og så der tror jeg, at de stabiliserer. Og jeg tror det, fordi jeg har jobbet i områder af østlig Slesvig-Holstein, hvor der faktisk bare findes vinterådlade korn, og der findes ingen tofsviber i jordbrukslandskabet alls. Og det betød, at når vi havde et live-projekt, når vi gjorde alt det rigtige på engerne i det område, så kom der ingen tofsviber. For der var simpelthen intet tofsviber i hele området længere. Jeg tror det er fordi, at engerne på et sæt er lidt afhængige af jordbruksmarkerne til at supplere i perioder med mange ræv. Eller det vi formodentlig gør og får succes med, det er, når vi så laver predatorbekæmpelse, når vi laver rævjagter og holder rævtrykket nede, så skaber vi situationen, der er modsvarig til bottområden i en naturlig fluktuation. Så jeg tror, vi har to muligheder, og vi kanskje behøves dem både. Vi kan forsøge at give tofsviberne gode muligheder og hækker i jordbruksmark med vorteafgrøder. Og så har vi muligheden at have intensiv predatorkontrol på engerne. Jeg tror det bedste ville være, hvis vi har både, men kanskje kan vi klara oss bara med intensiv predatorkontroll.
Jag tycker det illustrerar väldigt snyggt det här att ett landskapskontext är viktigt. Och det nu sker ett flöde av arter mellan olika habitat. Att man har ett bredare perspektiv och se vad som händer i landskapet, inte stirra sig blind på en enda lokal. Så och det visar ju den här pendlingen av viper då mellan jordbruksmark och strandmark.
Om jag bara tittar på bilden här och jämför Leftwing och Black-tailed Woodward, så blir min första tanke och reaktion att det är ett högre betestryck i wet grasslands och det gör att viperna mår bättre och får ut fler ungar och rödspoven då minskar istället eftersom det blir predationen säkert högre för det är kortare vegetation. Det var första reaktionen när jag ser bilden. Finns det någon sån tanke bakom?
Ja, jag kan också gissa. Nej, jag vill inte, alltså, med det där exempel fra Dømmer, der går det fantastisk bra for både tofsviper og rødsbo.
Jag ska visa några bilder sen på där det går väldigt bra för rödsbo, men det finns inga tofsviper.
Fordi vegetationen er for høj. Ja. Men der er ingen tvivl om, at der er ikke noget totalt overlap i habitatvalg mellem rødsbo og tofsviper, men en af Heinrichs punkter var det der, at der skulle være en høj heterogeneity på selv på markplan. Og det betyder også, at hvis du har den der høje heterogeneity, som vi også har på Tipperne, så findes der gode tofsvipe-områder her, og så er der gode rødsbo-områder her.
Men jag tänkte predatorjakten i Tipperne, det var inget på kråkor eller så, utan det var bara landlevande rovdjur.
Ja, men vi har ingen der var en stor predatorundersøgning på Tipperne for 10 år siden, og der så vi at næsten alt predation foregik af ræv, altså med videokamera med ræv, og så lidt med brunskærhøg, men ingen predation af bogen eller høvetaget for krogfugler. Så mycket tidligt tog man det beslut, at krogfugler ikke var en vigtig predator på sættet, og naturligvis så rører vi ikke brunskærhøg, den lever vi med. Men vi har jeg ved ikke om vi har tid, men vi diskuterer også i sidste kvæld, hvad er det for noget med de her ræver? Er det ikke naturligt, at der findes så mange ræver? Det er absolut ikke naturligt, den situation, vi har med ræver på Tipperne. Fordi vi har den her intensive jordbrugs situation, så har vi fået, jeg tror bestanden nu er på 1,8 eller 1,9 millioner vildtjællende gæs. Og vi på Tipperne for 25 år siden, der havde vi ingen græsning af vildtjællende gås overhovedet om våren på Tipperne. Nu har vi mellem 10 og 20.000 i sluttet af april og starten af maj. Det er en ting, og du snakker mere om gæs. Men en anden vigtig sag, det er, at det der har været flaskehalsen for rævbestandet over tid, har sikkert været vinteroverlevende. Og i det øjeblik, vi har et område som Tipperne, hvor vi har om vinteren, vi kan have 60-70.000 overnattende spidsbærskors og vildtjællende, der går yes. Når så vi får fugleinfluenza, så dør der ganske mange yes. Så de sidste 3 vintre, der har der ligget mellem 100 og 300 døde yes på de her enger, som ræven bare har haft så bare kunne leve. Og det betyder, at hvor der har været knaphed på føde, på mat om vinteren i naturlige tider, eller for 200 år siden, eller whatever, så er der rigeligt med mat i sådan et terræn som Tipperne, fordi vi har gæstene. Og så har vi også, fordi der i hele taget er meget mere kvæve og næring i systemet alle steder. Så jeg vil gisse, at i nogle af de gode områder, som Tipperne for eksempel, der har vi kanskje 10 gange flere ræb nu, end vi havde 100 år siden. Så det er ikke naturligt. Så man kan sige, at det er predatorregulering er på et sæt en kompensation for en kunstig skabt eller menneskeskabt situation. Og så bliver det indviklet, når man skal diskutere, fordi så kommer man selvfølgelig let til at skulle diskutere med folk, der diskuterer med hjertet mere end med data. Og så er det svært at sige, og jeg mener, alle mennesker har haft, inklusive mig selv, store oplevelser med ræv, der render rundt eller finder en rævgryte med rævunger, der ligger rundt gryten. Så man har et mycket varmt forholdende til ræv. Det er mycket få mennesker, der har set det, som vi andre ser. En ræv, der på 3-4 nætter støvsuger en hel kystlinje for rødbenede unger og løber efter grågæslinger ude på marken og fanger en efter den anden. Altså, hvis alle mennesker havde det på nethinden også, ikke bare den fantastisk søde ræv, men også problemer for andre skabninger, at de der søde ræv, de er i landskabet. Så vil vi måske få en mere balanceret diskussion også med hjertet.
Tack så mycket.